From the creator of Panzer Dragoon and Phantom Dust, here's the premiere of Crimson Dragon, exclusively on Xbox One.
That was good.
Keeping it G ain't nothing. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. Watch a young nigga show his ass I'm puppy.
The demo features dynamic gameplay that can happen only in Battlefield. Let's take a look.
Go, go, go!
Are you in?
Oh, yes! No, no, no!
Get him, get him!
No!
It will happen, I promise.
I got the whole block bumping. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it.
I thought we was trying to get out of this bullshit.
You sounding more and more like a snee-eye itch every day.
You know what this is. Tell them it's a celebration, bitch, yeah.
I sound like somebody trying to make some paper and not get killed.
Oh, my bad, Mr. Gold Card.
Courtesy of a hunter beat. Got my Crips and SA.
Now, I'm excited to announce that Xbox One will launch this November in 21 markets around the world at $499 in the US and 499 euros in European markets and 429 pounds in the UK.
You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. Watch a young nigga show his ass I'm pumping. I got the whole block bumping. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. You ain't gotta like it cause the hood don't love it. Watch a young nigga show his ass I'm pumping.
All right, I am speeding.
Check, check, 1, 2, check, 1, 2, check, check, 1, 2.
Let's go.
1, 2. All right, from the top. Let me read my line.
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm hosting, so I'm incredibly nervous. All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of TouchStones from Dude Is This Thing On. I'm Emilio Cariotti, and joining me for the first time, our esteemed co-host Tyler Daswick.
Wow, esteem. I'm honored. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I figured you're a long-time hoster, and now we've switched roles, so this time you're just the esteemed co-host, and I'm the man in charge.
Little bit of a demotion, maybe, but
a little bit of role-playing in our relationship, Tyler. You know, you got to do some things to spice it up every once in a while, keep it from getting stale.
That's right.
Okay, so we just saw that big clusterfuck of a press release for Xbox One, which happened in E3 2013. It was a big hubbubaloo when it actually happened. There was a lot of pushback that occurred because of that press conference, and honestly, like, the ripple effect is still kind of affecting us today. But I kind of want to take us back to the year 2013, before the presidency went to shit, and we were still living in this weird utopia of good video games.
It was an innocent time.
It was the best of times. It was about to be the worst of times. But I kind of wanted to get your opinion on it because by 2013, you were not necessarily a novice to video games, but you were just dipping your toes into really the culture of it. And frankly, the culture of video games was really, really expanding to everyday people. I've been playing video games since I was like 4 years old. No joke.
Yeah.
And you had sort of just gotten into it mid high school, and this was like year after high school had ended. So I want to get your opinion. What did you think about that press conference? What were your doe-eyed thoughts about it back in 2013? And just sort of get your take on the whole situation.
Yeah. So 6 years ago, I feel like as a new video game player, I really felt a boundary between single player, which is what I always preferred. I liked the games with huge story modes and long campaigns and a huge devotion to just the one player experience. I really saw a boundary between those games and games that really emphasized online play. And in 2013, I think when a game associated itself with the internet, that kind of scared me and like put me off to the game. I was sort of afraid of kind of the toxicity, my perceived toxicity of like the online community and everything.
Right.
And so when I hear Microsoft come out at this huge electronics conference, E3, and say, our console is going to be tied to the internet. I was kind of scared, dude. No lie. I thought my video game values, I guess, as someone who loves single player, was going to be threatened a little bit.
Well, you weren't too far off, or at least a lot of people would agree that you kind of hit the nail right on the head there. Like, as a video game player since like the late 90s, you know, when I was a youngin', you pretty much really only had a lot of single player options. Don't get me wrong, there were still like LAN parties and people were playing like Unreal Tournament and shit like that. But as a 4-year-old, I wasn't playing any of that shit. Like I was playing Spyro and like Crash Bandicoot and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
So I was not new to online gaming. I'd been big into Call of Duty and Battlefield and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't necessarily only consider myself a single player gamer, but just like you, single player is definitely more important to me than multiplayer, like 99.99999% of the time. And when they make their big announcement of, hey, for copyright reasons, not even just like communication reasons, just basically like copyrights, so they don't get any of their shit stolen, the Xbox is going to have to check in online every couple hours, or you're not going to be able to play video games. Like, Jaws hit the floor. I saw that press conference live because I was actually just really excited to see what the Xbox One was going to be like. And I know a lot of my friends were like, I cannot believe that that Xbox is going to do that. And for that reason, a lot of them actually left the platform. And to this day, like, Xbox is still kind of reeling from that really dumb press announcement. But, you know, honestly, that wasn't even the last of the big mistakes that they made. Do you know what other crazy thing they did during that press conference? Do you remember? Because it was just as crazy, but maybe not as like insane as saying, oh, it has to check in online every couple hours.
Oh gosh, I don't know, but if I were to guess, I feel like it would have something to do with like a lame peripheral or accessory, because I feel like those never work out.
Yeah, so that, just like the fucking, all the stupid accessories that were for the Game Boy back in the 90s, Xbox had a particularly stupid accessory. If you remember, like, it started with the Xbox 360, and then for some dumbass reason transitioned over to the Xbox One. It was, drumroll, the Xbox Connect, which nobody fucking uses anymore. I didn't like. So when the Xbox 360, yeah,
I haven't thought about the Connect. I think that's the first time I've heard the word Connect in like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, because it's dead. It's deader than dead. It's deader than like, I don't know, a dead person. So it's deader than Abe Lincoln.
Nailed it.
Yeah,
so
like it's gone.
So what exactly was it?
Well, yeah, thank you for letting me explain this. So Connect was essentially like, I don't know how it originally started, but the way that they sort of like tried to panhandle it to people buying Xboxes was back in the day on like the second or third generation of Xbox 360. I think it was called the Elite. I can't remember. It was like the all black, like really small one. They said, hey, we got this new cool thing that's kind of built into the Xbox, and you can get it retrofitted onto your own Xboxes if you're interested. But essentially, it's both a motion like sensor camera and like it's like a kind of a smart computer feature, kind of like Siri or Alexa or anything like that before those were really big, where essentially the big thing was you could be like, Xbox on, and then your Xbox would fucking turn on, and then it'd be like, Xbox, go to YouTube, and then it'll do that stupid shit. It was really dumb, like voice command crap, right?
Okay.
It immediately ran into problems. People who were playing online with you, if they knew or would just at least guess that somebody in the chat would have like an Xbox with Kinect, they'd turn their microphones all the way up and they would just scream Xbox off, and like 5 people would get dropped from the fucking thing if they had their like speakers all the way up, because the Xbox would hear that and then immediately turn off, right? So just immediately ran into that problem and probably should have just killed it right there. But for some dumb ass reason, Xbox continued to push this tech to the point that they put it on their new platform. And then get this, besides listening to everything that you're saying, because it has to listen for those stupid voice commands, and having a camera that could be operated and look at you while you're doing stuff, mainly playing those stupid Kinect Dance Star Wars games.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Exactly. That was the main draw, was they were trying to essentially compete with Wii, but without like controls or something like that. And then PlayStation also, to its bad credit, also had like a control aspect to it with those stupid like ice cream cone looking glow stick motherfucking things.
Oh yeah, they had like a big
the
controllers
big,
had like a big blue ball.
Yeah. It was all stupid
Oh my
stuff,
gosh.
and it's still in VR, but that's not important. What is important is essentially Xbox or Microsoft said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna take all the data that we have from your Kinect, as in all the visual data and everything you've ever fucking said to it, and we're gonna sell that." So that people can like focus their marketing based on the shit that you've told your Xbox and try and sell you crap. People really fucking lost their bananas at that shit. And it was just like a double whammy. It was like, cool, go fuck yourself. We're gonna have DRM, and also we're gonna sell all your stuff to commercial like companies, and people freaked out. So.
Wow, good thing we don't have to worry about that.
I know, right?
Anymore.
It's not like Facebook does that or anything. But I mean, at 2013, our naive asses, I don't know if Snowden was even a thing back in 2013. He might have been a 2014 revelation. I can't remember. But in any case, we were naive and dumb. We deserve exactly what we got. But I mean, the big thing is they doubled down on bad ideas. And that is the reason we're starting out actually with Xbox instead of our main piece, which is actually Rockstar and GTA 5 and the ramifications of that video game. In order to really understand what made GTA 5 such like a monumental, I guess, achievement in video game history, you kind of have to set the stage, sort of like what we did with the Instagram episode. And so 2013... Okay. These stupid things come out for the Xbox One. They announced the new Xbox 360 to hold everybody over until the Xbox One, and GTA 5 is announced to be coming out that year on that new Xbox 360 platform. So it actually jumped the shark, I guess you could say, the same way that the Kinect did, and went from 360 to Xbox One. That's actually kind of a big deal because most games really don't ever survive that transition, and yet GTA 5 was like totally able to thrive. So
to a video game rookie, to make sure I'm following you here.
Yes.
So Grand Theft Auto 5 comes out for the Xbox 360.
Yes.
But it is kind of from the outset makes a jump to the next generation of consoles, to the Xbox One. Which is being released amid all of these like weird developments that we just heard about.
All of these weird developments, all of this backlash, all of this like, what the fuck? Like all of that, GTA, it's coming out on the 360 and make the jump to Xbox One, which again, most games really don't make those jumps very well. But I think from the outset, GTA, Grand Theft Auto was always going to be an Xbox One game, but because of the way the timing came out where Microsoft is like, oh yeah, by the way, we're introducing a new console, they were sort of stuck in this limbo. But that's not necessarily too important to actually what Rockstar sort of achieved. But before we get into like the meat and bones of it, I want what's a Tyler Daswick explanation of your experience with the GTA franchise, because it is a long and storied sort of franchise going back all the way into the 90s, and I know that you are a bit of a fan of the GTA, like Rockstar games in general. So I don't know, doe-eyed Tyler, why don't you tell me what your experience was with both GTA, any GTA you've played, but especially GTA 5.
Okay, well, gosh, I feel like the Grand Theft Auto franchise, when you and I were little kids, was kind of the stigmatized video game franchise that was assigned to all of the like video games rot your brain lectures, right? Like, so this is the open world video game series where you essentially play a low-level or high-level criminal, and you run around the city where the game is set, and you can do pretty much whatever you want. There's a story to follow, but if you want to shoot a civilian, you can. If you want to steal someone's car, you can. In some of the games, you can pick up a prostitute. In the later games, you can gamble and do all this stuff. Like, I guess as a kid, my impression of Grand Theft Auto was, okay, this is the game like the bad kids play or whatever, like
Kind of, yeah.
But I think as the franchise went along and as I got older and aged with the games, Grand Theft Auto 3, then San Andreas, and then 4, and then 5, they kind of emerge as these satires of the American experience. And the franchise has been acclaimed the whole way through, but as I started playing video games and played Grand Theft Auto 4 and Grand Theft Auto 5, I actually really, really appreciated them as these like satirical stories that, again, for a video gamer like me who loved single player, they had these huge, rich stories and these rich worlds. And for me, I finally understood the value of getting to run around in that game and play in that world and kind of take part in this like twisted take on the American dream. I thought that was really cool.
Cool. That's actually a fantastic answer, Tyler, because you matured along with the content of the game, and so you were able to appreciate it that way. I mean, I think a lot of what you touched on was absolutely correct. Like, GTA and Rockstar in general had always been known as like this dirty game developer, and they made these horrible like murder simulator like snuff film games. Like, if you go back to a lot of their really early stuff that was happening even before or in tandem with early GTA, if you've ever heard of a series called Manhunt, that is some like dark shit. Like, you're a serial killer essentially. Whoa. And it's a Rockstar game. You are a serial killer, and you're essentially making snuff films like throughout the entire game.
Oh, wow.
And it's heavy. It's some pretty heavy shit. Like, it's Hitman times like 3.
Hey, didn't Rockstar also make Max Payne?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've, but it ties into that, like very, very gritty, very, very like noir, but games based really on like what is happening in America at the time. So by the time like, the early GTAs and like Manhunt had come out, there was all like the local news was awash with like, if it bleeds, it leads sort of like articles.
Oh, okay.
And so the American fascination coming out of like 9/11 and stuff like that was just very just depressing. A lot of death, just like really just gray, bummed out looking like fucking place. But that the representation that they made in the game was like a perfect like kind of echo chamber of that. It's an exaggeration, obviously, because it's satire, but it really does capture that American experience, and especially the Grand Theft Auto franchise. And so San Andreas really captured, LA in the 90s. GTA 4 captured New York City post 9/11, and GTA 5 really captures pretty much all of America. And GTA San Andreas, it takes place in Los Santos. San Andreas is kind of their take on California. Los Santos is their take on Los Angeles. And it kind of captures LA in like the 90s. So like during the Rodney King riots and the Bloods and the Crips and the craziness that was like South Central LA in the 90s. That's GTA San Andreas. And it does that really, really well. GTA 4 takes place in Liberty City, which is their take on New York City. And it really deals with like post 9/11 New York, like the mid 2000s, when the city was kind of rebuilding itself after this fucking huge tragedy, and it did that really well. And then most recently, GTA 5 takes place again in Los Santos, and really captures that 2012 to like now sort of period where everybody's on their phones, everybody's like kind of self-absorbed, like the millennial age where people are just trying to get famous on the fucking internet and look cool and have as much fun as possible before they die. And so it really focuses on like the main character is focusing on this midlife crisis amid all these like 20 somethings who he doesn't fucking relate to at all. And that is very relatable to exactly what we're going through now. So though GTA and Rockstar have always been tied to killing people and shooting cops in the heads and murdering prostitutes, things that a lot of parents back in the late 90s and early 2000s said would lead to school shootings like Columbine and stuff like that, really were misunderstood satire about the American experience. Just like something, I don't know, like South Park was always thought of as this show that just made like fart jokes, but in actuality was like one of the smartest fucking shows on television, go figure. So it sort of follows that same thread. Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
This reminds me of a story from my fifth grade class. I went to this charter school in Phoenix, Arizona for a couple of years, and it was really
so did
It was really like experimental and weird and kind of wacky. And I remember we no joke in fifth grade. I think this is around the time. It might have been San Andreas or 4. I'm not really positive, but a new Grand Theft Auto game had come out. And it was obviously super popular because all these games are super popular. And there was an assembly at my school that was like warning about Grand Theft Auto. And I remember there was like an argument between some like particularly rebellious students who like stood up in the assembly and like talked back to the principal and were like, but it's a fun game. And I remember the principal being like, it's Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, right. It honestly goes back. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Detroit Rock City, but it's like Kiss is the devil's music. Right. If you play it backwards, it's like satanic verses or some bullshit, right? It's honestly, it's the same thing. And there's crap that people talk about nowadays that's exactly like, man, shit doesn't really change in that way. Really, it doesn't. But if you're thinking about fifth grade, then I have my own personal experience with this because I was going to like one of those experimental charter schools, and my parents, who had never been strict about violence or sex or anything like that because they were European and really that doesn't bother them at all. Like I was playing Doom and Duke Nukem at like age 3 and like they didn't care. Oh my gosh. For some reason. I know, right? Like that's the thing. It was like I went from Doom and Duke Nukem, which are just like blood and guts everywhere, to in fifth grade you're thinking of GTA San Andreas because that had just come out. And I had convinced my mom to buy me a copy of the special edition. I still have it to this day. And on the PlayStation 2. And my dad, I had it for like months and months and months. I had blown through the campaign. I had played like every aspect of it, but I still just loved like flying around and like shooting people. My dad walks in the middle of like one of my rampages where I'm just like blown through like Los Santos PD headquarters, and there's just like dead cops everywhere. And like he walks in just as I'm like pumping a shotgun shell into like some cop's head, and he was like, "No more!" And he like literally took it out of like the thing and like hid it in his room or something like that. And I got it confiscated from me because he had heard on the news that people who played GTA 5 or GTA San Andreas back in fifth grade are gonna grow up to be like rapists and murderers or some bullshit and blah blah blah, blah, right? So that fear was very well like felt throughout the community, not just on the news, but in your school assembly and me at home. Like GTA was known as like the bad kids game. And one of my friends who was like a delinquent and probably ended up like becoming nobody, but I don't know, I lost contact with him. But he introduced me to GTA, and that like only solidified its deviancy to my parents' like generation, So
it was the bad influence.
Sort of right, exactly. But enough about the history of GTA. Let's talk about like what makes GTA 5 in particular such a long-lasting game, and such just like it is the embodiment of what video games kind of are today. Started with GTA 5.
I mean, I was curious. Like we're going to have a couple video game episodes in this series, but when we were doing research and pre-production for this show, this is the game that you landed on as this is going to be sort of like the catalyst for all video game discussions that we're going to have about this decade. So, I mean, honestly, I was a little surprised that the fifth, sixth, whatever game in a franchise, because I know there have been some like spin-offs of GTA, but
right, yeah. Chinatown Wars.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. So I'm curious what exactly its like influence and impact was.
Exactly. And people who are listening, I don't know specifically what episode this is going to be, but if you go back and listen to the very first Instagram episode, we explain the hallway with doors. And this door is labeled GTA 5, kind of like you just explained. And the reason for that is because of its influence in the way that especially multiplayer models and games that really focus on multiplayer draw their economic model from. And the big thing to know about GTA 5 is, let's just run down the two things, the two modes that you have. So in every single GTA game, and most of them, it's primarily focused on the single player campaign. Yeah, exactly, right? This is why you and I and a lot of people really like Rockstar for what they do. They're very good attention to detail. They try new things. A lot of their storylines are very cinematic, and they've always considered themselves as a video game company that makes video games that are really like the movies. You know, if these guys weren't making video games, they would be like a huge production company in like LA somewhere, I bet.
Yeah.
Because that's where they really draw their inspiration from. So there had always been multiplayer sort of in other GTA games, i.e. GTA 4 had a fairly robust multiplayer element to it. You can get online with your friends, you can blow up the city, you can drive around and shoot shit up, and then there was also like game modes that you can do, right? GTA 5 takes that to a whole new level. So there's the focus on the storyline, which is broken up to 3 different storylines, first time they've done that. But you can blow through the story pretty quickly, and you know it's a GTA story. Now, the multiplayer experience isn't actually released to the public until a couple months after the single player experience has been. That way, people who are really interested in the single player experience can really like take it in and spend time with it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When it does drop,
was that a new thing at the time? Because I feel like I remember when this game came out, and I remember the reviews were just rapturous and glowing, and it was heralded as one of the best games of the generation, one of the best games of all time, and so
yeah, people really wet their pants over.
Yeah,
this
but
sure.
I don't think it even occurred to me then that those reviews were talking about a game that didn't have this huge multiplayer element.
No, I mean you're absolutely right. As for is it the first time that's happened? You know, I thought about this a lot during the research for this. I'm not going to go ahead and say it's the first time that it's happened, but it was definitely one of the first times where I noticed it. And I was like, oh, that's, okay, that makes sense. Like, I appreciate that the multiplayer's coming out.
It was like a really new concept.
It was. I don't know if they were the first ones to do it, but they definitely were a big game company that had done it pretty early on. So don't hold me to that. But it's looking back in 2013, because I was like a freshman or a sophomore in college, and I don't remember much, but for various reasons. Looking back and just being like, I think that was the first time that they had done that. But that's very important because you're gonna see that more and more as we continue this episode. Ty. If I could be so bold.
I mean, I know I'm just a guest, but I mean, come on.
Right, Mr. Tyler Deswick, Dr. Esquire. You went to 8 years of doctor school. Not to be called Mr. But in any case, so you're introduced to multiplayer a couple months after single player comes out. And right off the bat, you can tell that it's already a more robust experience. It essentially has everything that GTA 4 already had. You can run around with your friends, you can play game modes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it had slowly been introducing this new concept of shark cards. And for the uninitiated, shark cards are essentially in-game currency that you can use to buy things like new guns, upgrades for cars, planes, all the cool gadgets that you want to play with in this sandbox, this world. I'm about to sneeze 1 second. We should be like a radio show that has like a sneeze button. But shark cards are used as in-game currency to buy all these cool toys that you want in the game to mess around with in this sandbox. And the way that you usually make money in the game is by completing missions or stealing money off of dead bodies, whatever, like finding money like in-game through actual in-game like means of accruing money in your criminal enterprise. Okay. The thing is, Tyler, it is significantly easier to buy the shark cards with real world money than it is to ever make enough money to buy anything substantial in the game. And so if that sounds familiar to you, it is a model that was seen a lot in things like free-to-play games. If you are familiar with Candy Crush or all those games that are like quote unquote real gamers really like poo-poo at. Right. So like Candy Crush or like Clash of Clans or Clash of Kings or Clash of Clams or Clash of Cars or whatever this stupid clone. There's about 1 billion of them, right?
A lot of things are clashing. Yeah.
Well, the reason those games are so popular and the reason there's about 1 billion fucking clones of them, Tyler, are because they are a massive money maker. I mean, I don't want to say it's gambling, but it's pretty gosh darn close, Tyler Deswick.
So help me understand. Like, so so the Grand Theft Auto 5 multiplayer element, it gives players this big sandbox that they can like run around and do Grand Theft Auto stuff in. And kind of within that sandbox, you can do like missions and stuff and make money. But the game gives you the opportunity to buy with real money these shark cards that basically represent in-game money. And so there is now a shortcut to take by putting more money into the game. You get basically more opportunities to buy like better stuff inside the game.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a direct correlation, just like in those free-to-play games where, hey, you need to build this thing really fast. Oh, cool. You have to sit here and grind for 15 in-world, like real-life human 365 days, 15 fucking days of sitting on your phone. Or for 50 cents, you can just like skip that process and build like your granary or whatever the fuck you're doing in a Clash of Clans, right? It's those things that were kind of like baked into the video game in order to make money. We're now seeing that really for the first time in such a big scale in a massive multiplayer game. So again, your explanation was perfect. Instead of sitting there and grinding and literally getting like $500 at a time to eventually save up to get a, $500,000 condo was one of the big things that you can get right out of the game. You could just say, fuck it, I'll pay $10 and get $10 million in shark cards, and then you could just buy that, right?
Oh, wow.
Yes, that is so effective that it essentially launches GTA into the biggest moneymaker of any video game in history ever. I think the official numbers are... so sales of units, like discs or downloads or whatever, however they get the medium to the player, since 2013 at launch, 90 million
Oh my
units.
gosh.
And that's like... For the base game is like $60 a pop, right? So right there off the bat, massive fucking game. On top of that, they made $6 billion in revenue just from the game itself. That's shark cards and all that stuff that you pour into the game. $6 billion. That's more successful than any other movie. That's the most successful like piece of art, I guess you could say, ever made, ever. And it still continues to pump out money. This game is 6 years old. It shows absolutely no signs of really slowing down. They're consistently pumping out new material all the time in order to justify you buying the new set of monster trucks or jets and stuff like that. And that's essentially what their business model is, Tyler. They pump out new seasons. And what a season is, if you're familiar with it, like seasons of television, it sort of works the same way. A video game company, specifically in this case Rockstar, will be like, okay, in 3 months we're going to roll out a new multiplayer experience. It's going to be a new little like storyline that you can play with your friends, and that comes with like new guns, new gadgets, new airplanes, new whatever it is in the game that you need to complete those missions. And you can either grind for them, Tyler, or you can pay money to get the shark cards and skip that entire fucking process and just get the cool like flying Back to the Future looking car. And that is, like I said, so successful that it's being copied over and over again by other video games. And so, I mean, again, just as the casual gamer, this is so permeating to the complete market. Like, I can sit here and talk about what it looks like as a video game guy, but I want your opinion on it. Like, do you see this really bleeding into other video games? Like, what are some examples that either you've played with or that you've stayed away from specifically because of this model?
Well, I think that, gosh, I feel like especially in terms of multiplayer experiences, as someone who, again, like loves those campaigns and story modes and all that stuff, I feel now like there's a higher barrier of entry into multiplayer games because, we talk about this in Grand Theft Auto 5. Like you can buy, better cars and apartments and guns and all this stuff. There's a shortcut to all of that. I kind of come from this like system where I'm like, okay, I have my $60 that I've saved for a video game. That's expensive. So here, I'm going to put it down and I don't really want to pay anything else. But these people who have more money budgeted toward games or care more about games or whatever are going to pump all this money into stuff that actually makes them better at the video game than me who won't pay. And that imbalance, I feel like I see that a lot in multiplayer games. I think that the title that stands out to me was a Star Wars game that came out a couple years ago called Battlefront 2.
Yeah. Why don't you explain what that is for the uninitiated?
Yeah. Okay. So Star Wars Battlefront is like this huge multiplayer focused game that pits a whole bunch of players in the same like Star Wars arena, and they fight each other in like classic multiplayer video game modes like death matches and capture the flag and stuff. But from what I understand, you might need to help me with the details. The second Star Wars Battlefront game kept or locked away huge portions of the game behind these paywalls so that the main game only had like a few different levels, a few different maps, a few different like classes and weapons and things like that. And so if you wanted literally like the full experience of the game, you not only had to put down your $60 whatever up front, but then you had to pay all of these additional costs to unlock more than just 4 levels. And that, in my experience, was like a huge deal breaker. And I ended up not buying a bunch of games I was really excited for because they came with all of these extra charges I just wasn't going to make.
Exactly. Well, you touched on a perfect example of it going to an extreme. So GTA 5 is sort of the point that I wanted to make with talking about GTA 5 in such detail is that it's the base for all these other games to branch off of. And some of them do a very responsible job with their content, and others, like Battlefront 2, took it to such an extreme that we're now actually seeing a lot of pushback from it, both just from the player base and even legally speaking in Battlefront. It led to lawsuits by the Dutch government against the way that they were handling their business. And so the main thing to really focus on, you touched on it a little bit, is most of the content is locked behind essentially a paywall. And although something like GTA 5 also has aspects to that, you don't necessarily need any of those things to fully experience the game.
Yeah.
You can fully experience the multiplayer just from a regular car. Is it going to be as fun as flying around in a flying car? No, but you can still get there. There are free planes for you to go on. If you're just getting killed by people with higher level guns, you can go on safety mode and you can experience it without being able to be killed by any of those players. Like, it doesn't hinder you as a player at all not to spend that extra money.
And let's not forget, like, the Grand Theft Auto, the version of Grand Theft Auto 5 that you paid your $60 for before the multiplayer was considered one of the greatest games ever made.
Yeah, it's still a very serviceable experience for $60.
Right, that single player experience was viewed by many critics as a masterpiece, and it took a long time to get through that, and it was a really substantial experience full of side missions and quests in a huge city to explore. So for being the first thing, I think it's an example of how you put it, a game doing this kind of responsibly. For that base player, for that upfront purchase, you get something really good. But Battlefront was the opposite. You got jack for your upfront payment.
You did. You got a very, very half-assed single player, which, to their credit, they had added in the first Battlefront. There wasn't any single player. It was just multiplayer with a little bit less of a paywall because that stuff was still kind of being worked out. But you go into the second one where not only is it a paywall, the real point that I wanted to make was they introduced, or really heavily introduced, the concept of what we now know as loot boxes. Now, there had been other games that had done loot boxes, sure, but they had mostly been kind of cosmetic things. If you wanted new skins for your character or new avatars or anything like that, but it didn't ever really affect the gameplay of the game.
So how does a loot box work?
Exactly, that's the point I'm getting to, is a loot box, and this is why a lot of people consider this gambling. A loot box is a random draw of like 3 or 4 different cards or chests or whatever medium they get it to you, but it's an in-game thing where you open up a gift that is given to you by the game and you have a chance to win something like a skin or an ability, or in very rare circumstances, something legendary, something very hard to attain just by scarcity, a new character or a new map or something like that, right? There's different tiers to it. You can get something that's common, like a new skin. You can get something that's rare, like a new character, or you can get something that's ultra rare, like a new super ability or something like that. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be problematic if all of that occurred in-game, if there was no influence from outside money or anything like that. The problem now arises when you can pay extra real-world dollars to get more chances to roll those loot boxes over and over and over again so that you can collect all the stuff that you want to get. That is gambling.
Yeah.
That is,
wow.
if it's not, it's right up to the edge of gambling. And there's a reason that gambling in the United States is only allowed in like Reno and Las Vegas and like Indian reservations is because for the most part, it's fucking illegal. Like you can't do that. And so what was happening was people who were really angry about Battlefront, especially on like Reddit and different online communities like YouTube, were going on, investing money, and these statisticians were printing out spreadsheets of what were your actual chances of winning something like Darth Vader. You imagine buying a Star Wars game, Tyler, and not being able to play as one of the main characters because he's locked behind a random chance roll.
Wait, was
box,
that
right?
was that real about Battlefront?
Oh, for absolutely. If you wanted to play as like any of the heroes who are like Han Solo and your Leias and your Luke Skywalkers and your Boba Fett's and shit like that, you had to have a card in the game that you could activate while you're playing a multiplayer game, and then that would count as one chance. So you could be like, oh, I play my Darth Vader card, and then you get to play as Darth Vader until you die. The chances of actually getting one of those cards was incredibly rare that these statisticians found out. And so I can't remember the statistics on this because I didn't do specifically this in research. This is more of just like a tangent because you brought it up. I think it was something like the average player had to spend like, 500 hours in order to get one hero card. So if you wanted to play as Darth Vader once, you had to play like 500 hours if you didn't pay any money, or like $1,000 or something like that to roughly guess the chances of maybe getting a Darth Vader. And say you play the Darth Vader card and the game glitches out or the session is dropped and you're kicked out of the game. Well, you just wasted that card. Like, you played him for 30 seconds, have fun in 500 hours or $1,000.
Dude, I mean, we're recording and the listener can't see us, but dude, my jaw dropped. 500 hours.
It was something ridiculous like that for sure.
Wow.
500 for some reason just sticks out in my mind, but it was a substantial investment into a video game where it launched with like 3 maps or something like that. But you see how this sort of money-making economy can be blown way out of proportion and why there's so much negativity surrounding it today. So the Dutch government sued EA and DICE, who were the creators of Battlefront, and that led to other legal ramifications. But the main thing is, Tyler, and I was just talking to you about this a couple days ago, is things like loot boxes and pay-to-win mechanics are so taboo now that they're actually advertised against in video games. If a brand new video game with a really big, like, expansive multiplayer experience is coming out, 9 times out of 10 in a description or like a launch like party or like a press conference announcing the video game or something, the first thing out of a developer's mouth is there will be loot boxes, and if there are loot boxes, they will be cosmetic only. There won't be any pay-to-win mechanics. Like, they will openly advertise them like, hey, there's not going to be, don't worry, we're not going to like rip you off or anything like that, because of games like Battlefront. And so the foundation that GTA made, which was a reasonable foundation, you got $60 worth of a game, and if you wanted more stuff, then you paid more money based on how much you want. That got taken way out of control and has literally infected a lot of video games that we play today. For example, not just your Battlefronts, but Battlefield, which is also made by DICE EA, has a lot of that. Granted, now because of Battlefront, they're mostly cosmetic. There's nothing that gives you like any sort of boost or anything like that. Gears of War had sort of a quasi-ability sort of thing. They were right at the same time that DICE was getting pushback, so they still have some of those really negative things. But they have loot boxes. Really, really big ones are your Blackout from Black Ops, which is no single player for the new Call of Duty game. It's just focusing on multiplayer, which we see the shift more and more and more towards multiplayer experience, and a lot of game developing companies not giving a shit about the single player experience because there's no renewable value in that at all. It's $60 and you get it, versus multiplayer where you pay $10-15 every couple months to keep getting the new shit. So you see that in Call of Duty. And a really big one that's huge is Rainbow Six, which I play a lot of Rainbow Six. That is purely cosmetic.
Okay.
There's no enhanceability, so that's a very sort of balanced system, and it works for them. They're still able to make a lot of money just from that balance right there.
You know what's kind of crazy to me is like
What?
I think obviously there are like Battlefield is probably like the worst example either of us could think of in terms of like this.
Yeah, Battlefront.
Battlefront, yeah.
I know it's super confusing. There's a company that makes two games, Battlefront and then Battlefield.
Jeez. Okay, so Battlefront, the Star Wars game, is probably like the worst example I think either of us could come up with in terms of like this microtransaction business model. But the model, especially as displayed in Grand Theft Auto 5, is kind of brilliant. I like the video game shelf life in terms of like being like relevant and something that is pervasive culturally. Like for Grand Theft Auto 5 to come out in 2013 and still have this really, really passionate, involved, continuous online community 6 years after the game exists, like 6 years after the game releases, that's super impressive to me. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it boils down to, is that longevity. Like, again, you hit it right on the head. That it's so impressive. And what's even more impressive is that it still makes money. Because there are games where it's like, oh, well, the original Spyro's the best, and you have all these like cult gamers who like have their old PlayStations. That's longevity too. But the fact that it's still making that amount of revenue, that's what really caught developers' attention, and that's what led to what is the state of gaming today, where a lot of people would argue, especially on Microsoft, and we'll get into that Microsoft PlayStation debate as we're wrapping up. Microsoft seems to be more interested in multiplayer experiences, pay to play, but games as a service, which you'll hear over and over and over again, which again, for the uninitiated, is where you're releasing seasons of content for smaller amounts of money over a longer period of time in order to sustain sort of the economy that the video game houses within it. You're seeing more and more of that in lieu of focusing on single player content. And again, it's gotten Xbox in some hot water. A lot of people will look at Xbox and be like, there's no good original games on Xbox anymore. Coming from the 360, the Xbox 360, which was known for housing some of the best original content that we've ever seen in gaming. Now a lot of people look for PlayStation 4 to fill that sort of void, and they're more than happy to do it. I don't think the PlayStation model is going to try and compete head on with this games for a service sort of thing, where it doesn't have to, and it knows it can still draw in a good fan base just from really strong single player content. Your games like your Uncharted, The Last of Us is really single player heavy. What's that new
God
one?
of War.
God of War, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Like, those are two, like, well, God of War is actually an old franchise, but Horizon Zero Dawn is a completely original game, and it did fantastic, and sales from that were great. So obviously there are still people who want original content that is more single player focused than multiplayer. It's just that there's this weird schism in the community now, and a lot of people are really depressed by it. Like, you know, we can talk about, like, I don't know, what do you think the lasting impact, like, what do you think the future looks to us like now that we've seen it at its worst and we've seen blowback from it, but it's still sort of sticking around? Like, was this overall a good thing for you? Because you just talked about, like, kind of the silver lining of GTA 5, how impressed you are, but, like, what's the damage of it, you know? Like, was it a good thing that it happened?
Yeah, well, I think when I went back and read some reviews of Grand Theft Auto 5 before we got on the show, I thought it was really it was interesting to look at the specific points of praise for this game before all of the multiplayer stuff came out. And I think that it's interesting that is the game's predominant legacy when we're talking about, like, we've just lived through this past decade that's been dominated by the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and Grand Theft Auto 5 is the bridge that carries us from the previous generation, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, into sort of this, like, dominant decade of video games. And the critics in either version of the game, for the old generation or the current one that we're almost at the end of, look at like Grand Theft Auto 5 refined so much of what was great about the last generation, carried it into the new one, and it did all of this innovative stuff with the single player in terms of like the expansiveness of its open world and the map you could play inside of. It had, instead of one main character, you could do 3 main characters, and then you could switch between them at any time, no matter where they were in the map. You could push one button and it would switch perspectives, and you could instantly, seamlessly start playing as someone new and someone different.
Yeah.
And
It was
it was
cool.
really
yeah.
cool. It was really cool. And I think it's interesting. It was crazy to go back and read all of that stuff, and people would be like, this is going to change video games forever. Video games are never going to be the same, et cetera, et cetera. But all of those elements that we looked back on and saw as like super innovative, multiple protagonists, like open worlds being what it was, like those didn't really take in the same way that this business model did. And I don't know if I feel like I definitely don't feel like happy about that as someone who really like prizes great single player experiences, but I don't really know how I feel about the legacy of this video game being all about the video game business and not the like video game, I guess like storytelling experience or artistic experience.
Man, yeah, that's a real bummer.
Isn't it weird though? Like you like totally
you're
forget all the like great things about the single player element. They've been totally lost to this like business innovation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it was a missed opportunity to not take a lot of those innovations into account for other single player. I'll actually be the positive one here, because I think there are some silver linings. I think because there's been so much pushback on this multiplayer thing. I talked about this before to you in private. I don't know if I've ever done it. Maybe I've done it in like our old show, talking about like specific games. But like I had this theory about. It's probably not even an original theory, but I have this theory about like multiplayer in the way that it's prefab gaming. And I think I talked to you about this last time we spoke, but my sort of theory is that kind of like a prefab house or like a prefab shed or anything that you've ever seen, it comes in pieces and all the pieces are already like pre-made and they sort of just like whoop, pop them up. And then that's it. That's your sort of house. And that's sort of what the multiplayer experience has become is the way that multiplayer used to work is you loved the single player experience so much that you're like, damn, I can't wait 4 years until the next Call of Duty or whatever comes out. I'm just going to grind into the multiplayer experience because it's fun and I can play with my friends and I can kind of make my own like stories, my own shootouts or something like that in the multiplayer experience. It was an addition. It was an appendage of the actual single player experience. Now they're two completely separate things. There's usually not even like a bridge between the two at all. And the multiplayer has become prefab gaming, where it's just a box of like really low res detailed, stuff, whether it's Apex where it's just like low res grass or, the new Battlefield where it's just like, it's something pretty until you look really close at it and then you realize it's just like cardboard looking stuff. Or even Rainbow Six, which is the extreme example because of the nature of what Rainbow Six is. But if you pay really close attention to any of the environments that you're ever like, shooting it out in, they're just detailed enough so that they look good while you're swiveling around trying to look for the next target. But the second you just stop and sit in like an empty room and kind of just look at everything that's happening, it looks not that well put together. And that's, again, because it's just prefab entertainment where it's just boxes that they kind of fold together, duct tape together, and then throw the people in there and expect them to sort of make the content on their own. And that works, honestly, like it's fine. Like I enjoy Rainbow Six Siege. I don't care like if the blinking light doesn't look good or anything like that, but I'm not going to sit there and say to myself like, oh, this was really, really, really difficult for them to do, because I know the focus was more on making sure the guns work and the character goes down when he's supposed to, instead of the actual environment that you're shooting in, because that's secondary or tertiary. That's not important at all. And so the point that I was trying to make was, because of that, there's the people who just gravitate towards that prefab gaming, and that's fine. But there is now an even more dedicated, more ardent sort of support for the single player experience. And it's honestly, it's still alive and well, even on the Xbox. Like Rockstar did GTA 5, and then they immediately went and did Red Dead Redemption 2, which we will talk about later in a later episode. But that was so single player heavy, and it has a multiplayer element to it. It is so unbelievably bad, Tyler, that it was like DOA. It lasted about a week before people were like, fuck this. I'm out. They tried to copy the success of GTA 5, but tweak it more so that it was more driven on outside economic influence, and people were not fucking having it. And it died.
Wow.
And it doesn't look like they're doing anything to revive it, which means that gamers, at least in some regards, are interested enough in their community to be like, we don't want this bad influence affecting the games that we really, really care about. I don't give a shit like if it affects Call of Duty, because Call of Duty was dead 10 years ago. Like if you want to make a crap prefab Call of Duty game, go for it. Believe my Red Dead Redemption out of it. And so there's that sort of silver lining there was like politics, you know, when something bad really happens, or like world events, when something bad really happens, it's a tragedy that it happens, and it might happen again, but people's attentions are sort of grabbed to the issue at hand, and that's an ability for them to actually change it for the better one way or another. So if there's anything that we need to leave off on, I think there's a little bit of a silver lining that because of the attention that was brought on by the people like DICE and, you know, stuff like that, people are more keen on preserving the things that they like about the actual art form itself.
That's cool, and that's encouraging. I feel like I know we're going to have a few more episodes about video games in this series, and I don't want to give away exactly what we're going to focus on because we have some cool games, but I want to keep the surprise. But I can anticipate, as you kind of like walk me through those episodes too, that because this Grand Theft Auto 5 is sort of our tentpole, we are going to sort of be looking at these other video games of the past decade in terms of how they relate to this particular business model. Because I feel like what you're getting at is the industry now can kind of be divided into these camps in terms of how they treat microtransactions, multiplayer, and the way that players are paying for their content. Am I like on base there?
Pretty much, yeah. It's now, instead of trying to service all of those people in the same thing, because that's essentially what they were doing with early multiplayers, like introducing skins for, like, you know, CSGO, Counter-Strike, if you're familiar with that thing. They had always had their own economy to a ridiculous extent. Some of the skins in Counter-Strike go for like thousands of dollars to get like a rainbow skin on it. I'm not even joking. Like, people have been robbed like at gunpoint for like stuff like this. It's insane, right? Like, EVE Online, there's $1 million ships that people have on EVE Online that can be lost in battle. Like, actual people spent $1 million of their own dollars like building it. And those games have been around for so fucking long. And so what was happening on mainstream gaming, which are your consoles, which service a much larger majority of people than PC gaming ever will, because it's just more complicated to run those machines. They tried to service both sides of that and then took it to the extreme with the monetary side, had to scale it back a bit for legality reasons. And the rest of everybody else who was more interested in the single player experience is now branching off, in my opinion, and making their own stuff. You have better influence in indie games, or more attention to indie games like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. That was maybe the first or second episode that we did it on our old show. Was that video game, and it was very well respected. And we'll talk about indie games later on, but that's what I'm talking about. All of this is going to be influencing the way that video game, the economy, the community has been fractured into people who are really focused on online gaming, on making Twitch videos, on streaming, on making money off of this, and those that are just really there to enjoy like the art. And it's not to divide it up and be like, these guys are fucking Nazis and these guys are like, you know, heroes or anything like that. There's good and bad in both sides, honestly, and we'll explore that more with future episodes for sure.
Awesome. The only thing that occurs to me is that this is a very modern business model, and that might sound like kind of dumb in a podcast series that's talking about cultural items of the decade, but like, I think it's kind of funny. I can see, I can imagine a Grand Theft Auto 6 in my mind that satirizes this exact thing that we're talking about. And so I think
that's actually
I
a
think
good
that
point.
adds like a sort of like funny irony to it, that like it's coming from inside the house, you know?
Wow. That's actually, you know what? If they did that, like, massive respect. I would just bow any sort of headwear that I was wearing and be like, touche. That is actually a really good point. And we should just end it on that. So we'll hopefully see you guys for the next episode. Stick with us as we pretty much go through the rest of the video game corridor.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, okay. See you next week.